Welcome to today's episode of GorillaCast. It's our first episode for the year 2025. I hope everyone had great holidays and a happy new year. I'm back in the studio with our first repeat guest, Gorilla Capital's founding partner, Risto Rautakorpi. Welcome back, Risto.
Thanks again. And this time I try not to sink into my chair as much as last time, but let's see how it goes when I get excited.
No, it's good to get comfortable. That's when we get your best thoughts out of you. Last time when we were in the studio and the initial first episodes of GorillaCast, we've spent a lot of time talking about the product market fit. But I think today it would be interesting to get your thoughts on how should you measure your progress as a startup prior to finding product market fit, and to get some understanding is that are the metrics and the way you should measure your progress different before you reach product market fit and after that. So just setting the stage with that, how do you view metrics prior to PMF, and how should people look at it?
Well, metrics might be a little bit too specific of a word, because metrics refers to something that you can quantify and you can measure precisely. For an early stage startup, very few things are measurable precisely. So maybe a more appropriate word might be an indicator rather than metric, because a metric in it directly gives a wrong impression of what this is all about. But just kind of from a high level perspective, let's put things into the right perspective. A startup is a school kid or business. You don't ask a school kid how much money they are making. You ask them, what did you learn today? What number or grade did you get at the exam? Adults, you may ask how much money you make. If you ask a teenager too often how much money they are making, they get the feeling that, oh, that's important, that's the only thing that matters. And then they drop school. And they get a job flipping burgers or whatever they can get without any education, and that pretty much sets the career plan for the rest of their lives. The same could happen with startups. If you apply metrics that are meant for adult businesses, like revenue growth, like EBITDA, and some very specific metrics, the startups think that that's the only thing that matters. And you get what you measure, you get what you ask for, so that drives their behavior. But for an early stage startup, just like for a school kid, the number one thing is to learn. But if the objectives or the metrics distract them from that focus, they don't do what they are primarily supposed to do. So it is ultra important to be focused on the right, I wouldn't call them metrics, indicators or North Stars or whatever, as your guiding principle of what you should be focusing
on. That's a very good way of kind of making it concrete in terms of how you're looking at it. And when you talk about the indicators for these school kids, what are some of the most important things that you think people should be looking at and focusing on in the early stage?
Well, the fundamental for ever getting a business is to have the understanding of why customers buy. So before product market fit, that should be kind of your North Star metric, that anything and everything you do should be somehow geared towards increasing your understanding of why customers buy. And now that is very abstract, so it's impossible to put an exact metric on it. But depending on the business, you can have indicators, but to begin with, just think yourself often that what new did you learn? Because the advance is a result of your learning. If you didn't learn anything and if you didn't notice your learnings, then there's nothing to act on. And if there's nothing to act on, nothing will change, nothing will improve. So the starting point is that you recognize, I thought this, but now I learned it is like that. And as a result, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's the actions that actually move you forward.
Understanding why customers buy, it's a phrase that we are using a lot, and as you mentioned, it might be difficult to precisely quantify what you've learned in that perspective. But could you give some examples of some of the best insights that you have heard from founders in terms of what types of insights they have learned about the customers?
Well, anything that improves the understanding of how do your customers see the world. So the ultimate objective is for you to be able to see the world through your customers' eyes, understand the drivers, and actually the best learnings are the ones that were surprising. Because like somebody said, that if you only get confirmation to the stuff you already knew, you didn't learn anything new. So as such, it's not useful. But when you are surprised, it means that you learned something you didn't know before, and that's a new element, which probably causes some changes. And if you change something, then you can realistically expect the results to change as well.
And when you're getting the customer feedback, when you're increasing your understanding of how customers buy, I think there is this delicate balance of staying on course with what you are trying to do and then taking in the feedback and making some course corrections based on that. Is there anything that you can give as a guiding principle for founders as to when should you consider making adjustments and when should you consider just trying to focus on what it is that you have set yourself to do?
Well, the right answer can only be found through trial and error, but make baby steps. So avoid radical jumps. So in the startup jargon, you call about pivots. And pivot actually is a term from dance and marching, which means that one foot stays in the ground and the other one can turn even 180 degrees. So one foot needs to stay on the ground. So don't change everything, because if you change everything, it's not a pivot, it's a jump. And then you start from zero again. So take small steps all the time and just try and test and see, because you going into the ivory tower and you're trying to figure things out in advance. In the startup world, that's not working because you are getting into the unknown, so no one knows. So the only way to find out the answers is to give it a go and see it out. But expose yourself minimally at any given time, but do it continuously. So rather than one big massive thing once a month, do something every day. Then if you see that you're going the wrong direction, not too much harm was caused and you can come back.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the kind of key indicators that you have found product market fit is when you can see that you can kind of make your product or service repeatable, that you can kind of start scaling it when a number of customers are happy with the same solution. But in the early stages, when you are still looking for that, when you are in the problem solution fit phase, I think just listening to you talk, would it be right interpretation that early on you can try to tailor your service a little bit more by customer to get an understanding of what resonates and what sticks?
Well, actually, what you should try to find is your ICP, your ideal customer profile to begin with, and that's one of the things that seems to be really hard for founders, because the more narrowly defined the ICP is, the better it is from the product market fit perspective. But the more narrow it is, many founders think that, well, then I restrict my overall market, and it's kind of against the inner wisdom to do so. But that actually is the thing to do, because you first need to nail the niche before you can scale it. So the more narrow you define it, the better your understanding. And once you have the perfect understanding, then you can see how you can scale it. So actually, I would say that finding product market fit should start from identifying your ICP, because you can't be all things to all people. You need to understand who is your target customer, and you need to understand them really closely. You cannot do that if you have too many buyer personas you should all try to please. So try to nail down your ICP and then build it from there.
You mentioned that it's oftentimes difficult for the founders to think about it that way. That if you go narrow, then you're limiting your market. I think the other thing that we see oftentimes is that the founders have been really taught to think big and to go after a big market, and kind of realizing that you can't go after a big market before you first conquered a smaller one. is sometimes difficult. Are there some other reasons why kind of narrowing down the ICP seems to be so difficult for founders?
Well, yeah, I guess everybody, just like any minor, anyone who is under 18, they would like to be minimum 18 so that they could get a driver's license and they could access a bar. So any early stage founder would like to be an owner of a real business where you can hire salespeople, think about marketing slogans, and do the things that adult businesses do. But there's no shortcut to jump there. You need to start from the beginning, and the starting point is to narrow the focus down, because you will never, if you try to jump the curve, you will never get there, because no one can instantly serve a huge market. The big market is a result of multiplying the individuals. So it starts from having a good grip on the individual. But another misnomer there is that narrowing down to the core ICP in the beginning doesn't mean that that is the market where you end up being when everything is said and done. That can be something completely different. You don't really know at that point where the journey will take you. But if you don't nail the beginning, you don't even get on the path. But once you nail that and you get on the path, then follow it, and eventually you'll find the market where you end up being. And that's when the metrics and measurements meant for adult business are relevant. But that's down the line. So, as probably mentioned before, in startup world, everything is very context dependent. So, at what stage on your learning curve, your development curve you are, different things are relevant. And so, when you are at an early stage, it's not relevant to even think about the overall size of the market, because you don't, goddammit, it, know what the market will be where you end up being when everything is ready.
Well, with that said, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is going to be, but I think it's important to ask it anyway. So if you're if you're thinking about that particular kind of dilemma for a founder, that if I narrow it down, I'm kind of focusing on just a small portion of market, and I might think in my head that I might be missing some opportunities. But how do you see, where is the risk bigger, that you go too small or that you try to reach too many customers at once?
You cannot go too small, because the ideal ICP is narrowed so precisely that you could not cut any deeper. That's the starting point. But if you try to attack it at too high of a level, your target is not specific. So it consists of so many different characteristics that you can't have an ideal fit. But when you narrow it down ideally to one person, then you say, for that person, I know exactly what they will need. That's the beginning. And from there, you start growing it. But when you narrow it down to that level, you can isolate the things that actually matter. And then you can also see that, those things that I thought are important are not. And when you get to that level, then you see the market from a different perspective. And then you understand that, which is actually a comment I've heard from some of our portfolio company founders, that after they had the courage to cut it down, they spontaneously made the comment that the market is surprisingly big. Because when you get to that level, you see things from a different angle. And then you see them from an angle that actually gives a basis for scaling.
That's a good point, and I think those aha types of moments when you really start realizing that this is what we are to this particular group of customers is one of the really big steps on the path. So if we think about the role of using the metrics or indicators, as you mentioned, you said that the biggest and most important reason for those indicators early on is to measure kind of your learning progress and if you are making progress. How do you see the balance in terms of getting indicators and measures? We're talking about startups that have been raising funding and they have some responsibility towards their investors. And to let the investors know what the investors are interested in, and on the other hand, you're trying to collect information that helps you build a better business. So how do you see that? Is there a contrast between those two viewpoints, or is there a way to be able to find one set of indicators that helps with both of those angles?
Well, unfortunately, I think too often there is a conflict between those two, but there should not be. Because if both the investors and the founders are aligned regarding where on the learning curve this company sits and what they should do next, then there shouldn't be a conflict. And then there should be a common understanding of what matters, what is important. But too often there's a mismatch that most investors, even if they don't recognize it directly themselves, they think they are funding a scaling phase. And hence they start applying metrics and indicators relevant for a scaling phase company to a company which might not be nowhere near. And then there is a built-in conflict. And that can be outright lethal because just like my example of a teenager who is asked repeatedly about how much money they're making, they skip school and they go to flip burgers. So if an early stage startup is pressured to show revenue, okay, they do whatever it takes to get some short-term revenue, compromising their long-term goals, which would be building the foundation for something that could be truly scalable.
Interesting. You've invested in and seen hundreds of companies. What's your general feeling? Is there enough discussion between founders and investors on what metrics or indicators are really relevant and how they should be applied?
Well, of course, I can only talk from a perspective I have been participating in. The rest is more of a hearsay and kind of secondhand information. But actually, I think the answer to that question is that no, there is not enough discussion about that. And quite often, there's not a discussion of any kind because the one who pays the piper calls the tune. So the one with the wallet decides. So the investor says, I gave you money and I set you the direction, which might not be in line with where the company actually is. But also the typical founder, at least in Finland, is still a first timer. They have no perspective themselves. So they take what's given and they think that, oh, that big authority who had the money, they must know. And if they say, this is what I should be focusing on, so shall it be. But it could be awfully wrong because, every investor would like to see business growth, of course. But if you apply that prematurely, it guarantees it will never be there because you kind of destroy the case. If you only want to invest in the scaling phase, then you should pick scaling companies that are at the scaling phase, which have already found a product market fit, which have enough traction, which have all kind of the basic education done.
That's true, and I think looking at startup kind of phase companies, early stage companies, they are always operating with very limited information, and you have to make decisions with very little. But if you look at investors versus founders, the founders who are grinding 24/7, trying to build a business and talking to customers and everything else, even though investors have experience in a number of different companies they've been involved in, you would imagine that the founders have a better and deeper insight in terms of what's right for this particular business. And I think in that sense, as you were mentioning, whether you're a first-time founder or it's easier if you've built multiple businesses. But I think it would be really important that the founders would be proactive themselves in trying to bring to the table their view of what is relevant, what is not relevant. And having that discussion.
Experienced entrepreneurs are. Because they have typically learned the lesson the hard way and they kind of know what is right to do in the beginning and they have the guts to kind of defend their position. But the first-timers often don't because they are not 100% sure themselves.
And not being 100% sure is one thing, and it's correct, and you shouldn't take too strong of a stance if you're not sure. But I do think that the basic message to founders would be that be proactive and spend time thinking about what really is relevant and have those discussions with investors.
Have conviction, defend your position, and also you should try to have investors who align with you, who see the world the way you do, because otherwise there's a built-in conflict and sooner or later that's going to result in trouble.
Yeah. So if the basic goal and target for the founders is to learn as much about why the customers buy and go on this learning journey and gather data and information on the business, how do you avoid getting into this kind of paralysis by analysis phase. You get so much input from different directions that you're not sure anymore. How should you be handling that information, and how should you be filtering what's important, what's not?
Well, actually, knowing what is important and as a result what is not is one of the cornerstone wisdoms for a startup, because there's so much noise, there's so much stuff that you could look at, you could measure, but actually at any given time there's only a handful of things that really matter. And you should understand what are those things for you now. They may change, they should change over time. Just like in school, if you go to the next level and all that, the priorities change. But what is important right now? And then what are the 2 or 3 key indicators that will guide you in the right direction on the current leg? When you reach the goal of the current leg, then you rethink and then you reorientate. But yeah, you need to have the courage to say no to most of the things that you might need to consider, because you simply don't have the bandwidth, and also they don't really matter. They are not important from the perspective, or does it help you to make or break?
If we then turn on looking at this, I think we've talked about on a fairly general level the guiding principles for the indicators. But if we think about, for example, Gorilla portfolio companies, we're asking them to do some reporting on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
What are some of the kind of key things that you like to see from the startups above and beyond what you've already mentioned in terms of understanding why customers buy and why are these things important to you?
Well, specifically on checking their understanding, we have learned that there's one question and answer that has proven to be the earliest indicator of what we can expect to come out of this company, and that is what they write to the question, new customer insights, if any. Because if they pick up the right stuff and if they then can execute on that, that's the formula. That's what the good student should do. You learn and then you execute based on your learning, and one by one you tick things off the list. Okay, now I discovered this thing. We need to fix that. Okay, focus on that, get it fixed, tick off. Next one, rinse and repeat, and eventually you'll get there. And it's been proven time and again that that's how it actually goes. But if you never have anything insightful, then it means that you are just not picking up stuff. So either you are not even exposing yourself to the stuff, to the raw material learning, which is discussions, interactions with customers, or even if you do, you are not able to extract the meaningful stuff out of that. And then that just means that maybe you shouldn't be a founder for a startup. It's not a job for everyone. So it doesn't mean you wouldn't be a good person, but it's just that your skill set might not be right for this job, because you need to be naturally curious to be willing to understand your customers, and you need to be drawn into that. And actually, it shows in the new customer insights answers.
All right. So if I'm interpreting you correctly, you can really see a correlation between what startups answer to that question and their traction
Eventual
and progress.
Success. Eventual success.
Eventual success.
Yep, correct.
That's really interesting and good. Is there anything kind of numerical or finance related that you look at?
Sure. For startup at any stage, but in particular at an early stage, the rule number 1 is stay alive. So make sure that you always have enough runway. And the trouble is that you never know how many iteration rounds you will need until you find the product market fit and until you might be cash flow positive. You need to stay in the game long enough. So you always, at any given time, need to secure enough runway, and typically an early stage startup depends on external funding. So your current funding will only have a limited lifespan. You need to make sure that you have what it takes to raise the next round. If you still haven't, and most likely haven't, found the product market fit by the time you get there, but you need to show enough advance. So your understanding of the market, your understanding of the customer in particular, your understanding of the ICP, as one of the key indicators, that actually is one of the acid tests we use. that how precisely can they identify their ICP. That shows the maturity. In the beginning, it's everything to everyone. It's broad, it's big. But then it can be laser sharp. And these guys have figured things out. So that's where you kind of see the thinking advancing. And that gives the basis based on which you could give them more money. Okay, you have used the money we gave you so far wisely. You have results to show for that. It's worthy of giving you some more.
Very good. In terms of setting targets and goals prior to hitting the product market fit, as you mentioned, even the metrics are difficult. You're looking at the indicators and so forth. What are some of those typical goals that you would see that are good in terms of driving the learning and helping founders focus on the right things?
Well, this sounds repetitious because it revolves around the same thing. So anything you can extract from the customers. So one of the activity metrics that our founders typically track is just the amount of customer interaction during the month, because that's kind of the starting point. If you don't even meet the customers, how could you collect the learning? And if you don't collect the learning, how can you make insights of that? So you need to be showing activity in the right areas for there to be at least a possibility for the value adding stuff.
Absolutely, and then one of the other things that I've kind of noticed, and one of the good things about founders who are really focused is not just how many customers you get in, but really understanding how the customers interact with your product and service and how sticky you are. Giving indication, because oftentimes you can just measure things in terms of how effective you are at engaging customers and selling things to them. But the real acid test comes once they are using your product and service. Is it what it is that they are actually looking for?
Sure. Well, sustainable business needs two things. You need to be able to acquire new customers, and then you need to be able to keep the ones you have acquired. And if your system leaks badly in one of these two, it's never going to be a sustainable business. And actually, the second one is harder. So acquiring customers, well, but just by throwing a lot of money into it, you can artificially do that. Applying power selling techniques and all that, launching an assault. Yes, you can acquire customers. Will they stay? Depends on your service actually delivering on the promise and meeting the customers' expectations. And that is kind of a true measurement of you adding real value for them.
Mm-hmm. Very true. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen that founders make when they are looking at these indicators and metrics?
Well, it comes from the sin number one, the premature scaling. So they are applying metrics and goals and indicators meant for adult businesses when they are still school kids. And that draws them to go after the wrong priorities. It's just prioritizing short-term, quick revenue, which might be a distraction from what you were supposed to do, but we just need to make a quick buck. Okay, sometimes you have to just to stay alive, so no need to be overly guilty of that. But then at least you need to be conscious of what you're doing. I'm only doing this to get some money. I was young and I needed money. But yeah, being focusing on, for instance, optimization. So making fine-tuning the engine, optimizing different tactical components of that. The time for that is late. So at the early stage, you just need to get the big picture right. You just need to get the engine to run, fine-tuning it so that all the adjustments are perfect. That's for later day. But that is a typical thing coming from the adult world. Big corporations, they are all the time fine-tuning, tweaking this, that, and the third thing. So people coming from that background, they have that in their veins, and hence they apply those kind of things, which are, well, yeah, the challenge related to this is actually a common paradigm for the startup things, that many of these things are not categorically wrong. They are just wrong given where you are. So they may be perfectly relevant once you get there in year X, but not now. If you apply them now, it can be lethal. But yeah, being overly focused on some tactical execution related detail, which you know that, when the time comes, I can fix this. That can wait. Now I have bigger fish to fry.
Mm-hmm. And in relation to that, we're asking in our investor reporting the founders to indicate where they are on the J curve that we discussed previously, and of course the ideal thing is that the founders identify exactly where they are. Rarely happens. So which is a bigger mistake in your opinion, thinking that you're too early in the J curve or that you're too far on the J curve?
Of course, being too far. We have had one or two who have put themselves too early on the J curve and not on the actual. I think you're a bit more mature than that, but those guys were ultra humble and modest. But the reason why we asked that is a little bit like an army exercise, that it's just a repetition about repetitious reminder of where you actually are and what is relevant given where you are. So I'm only a third grader, so I shouldn't even look at stuff meant for the ninth grader. But if you firmly believe you are much further along than you truly are, it means you will be doing things that are meant for a later stage company than where you truly are. And so you are off to begin with.
Yeah. And that leads to then bigger and compounding mistakes. If you're a little bit too cautious, you might not be advancing as fast, but at least you're not making serious mistakes.
Yeah, and again, going back to my earlier point that the rule number one, stay alive. If you are too modest, that doesn't kill you. You may leave an opportunity unused, but that doesn't kill you. But if you think too much of yourself and you act accordingly, that can kill you.
Well, thank you very much, Risto, for the insights for today. I think the message is extremely clear and is in line with what we have been discussing before, that if your number one goal is to find product market fit, the way to do that is to have a deep understanding of your customers. And the more you understand, the more insights you gain from there, the better your chance of getting there. Given the fact that you've already been here to answer our final questions, we're gonna skip the two first ones. But our next guest is going to be one of our portfolio founders, Aaku Asujamaa. So what would you like to ask Aaku when he comes to the studio?
Yeah, well, Aaku has had an interesting learning journey in finding product market fit. What does he consider his biggest surprise learning during that journey? What thing has surprised him the most along the way?
Well, that makes sense. Asking him about customer insights. Thank you very much, Risto.
You're welcome.